Hello everyone. My name is Naveen, and I work in the Drug Information Unit and Pharmacovigilance Cell in Hetera Hospital, and also serve as a lecturer in the Department of Pharmacy and Clinical Pharmacology at Madan Mandari Academy of Health Sciences. In today's session, we'll be talking about the clinical pharmacy status, its regulatory aspects, and what are the challenges and the role of academia in context of Nepal. So these are the contents that I'll be dealing in this presentation and this video, where I'll be talking about briefly on the introduction, what are the clinical pharmacy services, what are the regulatory aspects, dealing with the clinical pharmacy services, which are the hospitals that are providing clinical pharmacy services, what are the challenges and barriers, role of academia and hospitals in promoting clinical pharmacy services, and so on. So, as per the American College of clinical pharmacy belongs and is a very significant parameter that comes under health science discipline, which basically promotes the rational use of drugs. So, under that comes the different aspect. The first one being the optimization of the medication therapy, and the overall theme of clinical pharmacy is to promote health, wellness, and disease prevention. And those kind of manpower or healthcare resources involving within the clinical pharmacy field are known as clinical pharmacists, and they are involved in delivering the services known as clinical pharmacy services. So, in today's context, to achieve desired therapeutic goals, that is for the prevention of the disease, that is for the curation of the disease, that is to induce remission, also to achieve those desired therapeutic goals, clinical pharmacists in today's context applies various uh, various mediums, and the first medium being evidence-based therapeutic guidelines, the use and the promotion of evidence-based therapeutic guidelines, along with the evolving sciences and the emerging technologies. So you can see that with the evolving science and the emerging technologies, there also increases the concept of the proper use of this kind of evidence-based therapy as well as the use of this kind of technologies. And this is where clinical pharmacists can play a very significant role. So, clinical pharmacy services are the priority areas for clinical pharmacists involves several domains. The first domain being patient counseling services, right? So, uh, what kind of medicines the patient must be consuming, what are the doses regimen for the patient? This is very crucial. And what are the information services that are needed to be given to the patient? What kind of information that the patient needs to have regarding a certain kind of drug? What are the possibilities of drug-drug interaction? Is there any kind of possibility between drug and pharmaceutical ingredient? Is there possibility of any kind of interaction between drug and food? These are very common topics and very basic that needs to be counseled with the patient properly. And the fourth one is medication error assessment. The kind of error assessment helps us in dealing with the prevention of any kind of unprecedented events that might occur in the patient. That might occur unauthorized drug error, wrong rate error, wrong route error, and any kinds of error that are generally outlined by the American Society of Health System Pharmacists. The next one or the next priority areas is also drug-related problems, and this is the most important problems that encapsulate all kinds of adverse drug reaction, all kinds of adverse drug event, all kinds of drug-induced hazard, all kinds of drug-induced disorders. So, identifying and the resolution of drug-related problems is one of the crucial areas that comes under the clinical pharmacy services. The next one is pharmacovigilance activities. So, once the drug-related problems has been identified, there also needs for the existence of a robust system that would help in the proper recording, proper reporting for the detection of these kind of adverse drug reactions so that further any kind of unprecedented events in the future can be prevented. So the next one is medication reconciliation. So whenever there is a transit, a patient from one hospital to the another hospital, there might occur any kind of errors, any kind of intentional or non-intentional medication errors, and to resolve those kind of errors during the transit of the patient, medication reconciliation is very significant and one of the very important domain that comes in the clinical pharmacy services. And the last one that encapsulates that encompasses all of these domains is medication therapy management and is very much important, which starts with a proper medication review, personal medication plan, preparing a medication action plan, documentation, and follow up the patient. And this strengthen the idea of rational use of drug in any patient that are consuming more than five drugs, more than two drugs, or even a single more than one to two drugs. The overall priority areas for clinical pharmacies is wide in today's context. So whenever we talk about regulatory aspect, we first need to understand the constitution of Nepal, which is the most and the utmost thing for us to remember, because having the health literacy along with having the literacy about the constitution is very much crucial. So since the fundamental rights and duties, which is the part 3 of the constitution of Nepal, says that every person shall have the right to get information about of his or her medical treatment, and this information means any kind of information that comes or that relates to anything that has to do with the drug. So when it comes to a certain circumstances that the patient is consuming a certain kind of drug, he or she needs to be advised on the patient counseling. He or she needs to be advised on any kinds of drug related problems. That is why the crucial aspect, crucial regulatory thing that deals with the clinical pharmacy aspect directly and indirectly is the constitution of Nepal, as it links to each and every domain in today's society. The next one is the most crucial regulatory aspect is the Hospital Pharmacy Service Guideline, which was promulgated in 2015. However, there has been no revisions still after 2015, which provides a huge gap in context of Nepal that we are not aligning ourselves with the change in the time. So, however, the crucial thing that the Hospital Pharmacy Service Guideline 2015 gives us is that there needs to be an inclusion of clinical pharmacists in context of Nepal, starting from those kind of hospitals having 51 to 100 beds. So those hospitals with 51 to 100 beds must have a single clinical pharmacist. The act, however, the directive also defines what the clinical pharmacist means in this kind of condition. Clinical pharmacist in this kind of condition means any kind of healthcare resources who have completed their bachelor's degree in pharmaceutical sciences and has pursued a master's degree in pharmaceutical care, a clinical pharmacy, or has pursued a post-bachelor's degree after the B.Pharm program. And this inclusion of clinical pharmacists within the guideline is a remarkable thing. However, the execution of this guideline is still is very poor in context of Nepal. So currently, the most important thing for clinical pharmacists is to deliver the clinical pharmacy services. And the concept of clinical pharmacy services can be directly seen in one of the important guidelines that is codes for sales and distribution of drugs, which was first promulgated in 2071 in context of Nepal. However, in today's time, there has been a new amendment, and we have now currently codes for sales and distribution of 2080. And in the Rule 11 of 2071, despite this has been now terminated, the Rule 11 section, Rule 11C gave us the important roles for clinical pharmacists, which was that while dispensing the drug at any kind of service center, the following information and suggestions regarding the use of the drug must be given to support the appropriate use of the drug. So, which involves the method of intake, duration of intake, intake schedule, food or drug to drink to avoid expected but general side effects, prescription for missed dose, and all different other kinds of precaution. And this was a remarkable thing that was seen in the code for sales and distribution, which helps us in empowering clinical pharmacists as well as hospital pharmacists who are involved in OPD pharmacy services. However, in today's codes for sales and distribution of drugs, which is particularly available in Nepali language, uh, there exists a proper section for the different kinds of services that can be given from the hospital section, which involves the proper dispensing of drugs. And along with the proper dispensing of drugs, you need to give pertinent information, whether the fact that the drug is right or not, what about the dose, what about the amount of drugs, what about the quantity of the drugs, how are the drugs to be consumed, what are the drugs to be consumed with, either they are to be consumed with water or any kind of particular drinks in general, and what are the drug-drug interactions. These all kinds of effects. Similarly, expected but general side effects. These all are to be counseled to the patient, and this is what is engraved in the current codes for sales and distribution of drugs too. Along with that, the same guideline also deals with the vulnerable population, that is the pediatrics, that is the pregnancy period, pregnant women, that is the elderly period, and what kind of how the drugs are to be consumed in this kind of vulnerable population, and what measures to be taken while any kind of drugs are given for these vulnerable populations are totally engraved in this codes for sales and distribution as well. So the next important clinical pharmacy services that can be given by clinical pharmacists is also pharmacovigilance, and this has been totally been seen in the current codes for sales and distribution of drugs also, where it says that pharmacovigilance must be applied or must be done by the pharmacist in hospitals, despite it can be a role that it can be specifically divided for hospital pharmacists and clinical pharmacists as well. The pharmacists residing in the hospital and clinical settings can help in the detection, understanding, and prevention, as well as the proper recording and proper documentation of this kind of adverse drug reactions. So there are different hospitals in today's context. Since the hospital pharmacy service guideline being promulgated in 2015, there has been a remarkable change in the inclusion of clinical pharmacists in hospital too. However, the inclusion of clinical pharmacists is much more usually seen in the private zones only, not in the sections of governmental hospitals, which is very sad indeed. So in those kind of hospitals that are providing clinical pharmacy services involves the Manipal College of Medical Sciences in Pokhara, which ensured to provide clinical pharmacy services from Drug Information Center and Pharmacovigilance Center in its initial days, Nepal Cancer Hospital and Research Center through its oncology clinical pharmacy services, Nepal Medicity Hospital through ICU clinical pharmacy services, critical care clinical pharmacy services, East Medical College providing critical care clinical services, and many others, even including Kathmandu University Medical School of Sciences and several other hospitals and universities hospitals that are trying to provide clinical pharmacy services which are dedicated in providing any kind of clinical pharmacy services in general. So, despite the uh, promulgation of Hospital Family Service Guideline 2015 and the very poor execution of those guidelines, there exist huge barriers and huge challenges for us clinical pharmacists in today's context. And the first one is the acceptability of clinical pharmacists by any other healthcare pharmacist. Since when we talk about the role of clinical pharmacists in general, the roles are very subtle and very subtle and very significant, and the acceptability of clinical pharmacists by other healthcare professionals can be very much underlined, which is why it can be very much difficult to work with healthcare professionals in context of Nepal in today's period. And the next one is administrative support. Administrative support in general are also lack literacy in what kind of knowledge or what kind of expertise the clinical pharmacists generally provide. That is why this can be a huge barrier in today's context. The third one is poor communication. Since in today's context, still the syllabus and the curriculum of clinical pharmacists are not properly as per the residential services. That is why the clinical pharmacy courses are still divided in terms of clerkship period, credit hour points period. That is why the communication gap is still exists between the aspiring clinical pharmacy students as well as resident doctors and consultants too. So that creates a gap of communication and that develops over the period of time, which is why after graduating clinical pharmacists or those pharmacists who pursued pharmaceutical care or post-baccalaureate pharmacy PharmD students, there might exist a certain communication gap. Similarly, there is also lack of manpower and shortages of staff in today's context, which can create a huge challenge. And clinical residency for clinical pharmacists is one of the um, main challenge in today's context. We want to establish a clinical pharmacy residential program such that there will be a proper hand-to-hand basis communication and hand-to-hand problem-solving skill analytics for the clinical pharmacists that would have a collaboration with resident doctors as well as consultants. So similarly, there is also not any kind of robust standard operating procedure. That is, for example, we do have a guideline that deals with the inclusion of clinical pharmacists in today's context, but what are clinical pharmacists able to do in context of Nepal? That is the proper lacking. Won't be finding any kind of standards of practice by clinical pharmacists. For example, you will be finding the role of clinical pharmacists issued by American Society of Health Systems, Pharmacy, or Society of Australian Pharmacists, which would publicly endorse their standards of practice by clinical pharmacists. But since, despite being used large number of clinical pharmacists in today's in Nepal, there has not been a standards of practice, which shows that there has been a poor collaboration between clinical pharmacists as well as Ministry of Health and all of the policymakers. However, the last barriers I still feel is that there needs this underscores for an inclusion of a robust curriculum that favors for clinical pharmacy services. Since the Bachelor's of Pharmaceutical Sciences courses in Nepal are majorly distributed in industrial pharmacy, hospital pharmacy, clinical pharmacy, initial product chemistry, pharmacognosy, and phytochemistry. Clinical pharmacy services or clinical pharmacy can be underlined. That is why, if those kind of curriculum that favors clinical pharmacies comes out in a strong way, this might help us in strengthening our courses. So, since being an academician myself, I feel that there is a huge and very strong role of academia and hospitals in promoting clinical pharmacy. Since I work also in the hospital in drug information unit and pharmacovigilance, there exist different ways through which we can teach students to develop their enthusiasm as well as role in providing clinical pharmacy in coming days and in today's context too. The first one is experiential learning. Experiential learning means to learn something by doing, right? So for those kind of students who wants to come in the field of clinical in executing clinical pharmacy services or displaying clinical pharmacy services, they can properly collaborate with the hospitals such that they would come in the hospitals and they would learn by doing certain things. That is by providing drug information, by demonstrating any kind of instrumentational performance to the patient, by demonstrating any kind of counseling or any kind of identifying any kind of drug related problems in general. And that would help them to learn what are the courses. So this is one of the best thing about experiential learning. And the second one is exposure to the patient counseling centers and medication charts. Any kind of information, educational and communication materials that are being built in the hospital section, they can be assigned to students as an assignment work, such that they would also learn in identifying what are the literatures. They would also learn on how to create different kinds of charts and what kind of communication skills or what kind of communication knowledge should exist in a chart that would represent their information to the patient. And that would properly link the role of academia and hospitals in promoting clinical pharmacy services. Students can also identify their priority areas and the support to students in residency programs or training programs. So if there is an academia that has an linked hospitals, it would definitely help in supporting students in their residency programs too. As well as the last one is research and evidence synthesis. Since clinical pharmacy services particularly deals with clinical patients, clinical participants, that is why any kind of research or for the genesis of evidence, the existing role of academia and hospital needs to be there for any kind of evidence genesis, and that would help and uplift the spirit of the students too. And uplifting the spirit of the students in general can also promote the practice within the hospital too. So this one is very much important in that context. We need to identify what is the role of academia and hospitals in today's setting. So thank you for today's session.